welcome everyone to Moments of Being, Epiphany and Ethics in Virginia Woolf's Writings. I thought that I would introduce all three speakers in the order in which they're going to speak, and then we'll have time after their presentations for questions and discussions. And thank you to Emily Hinnov, who's our chat coordinator, who'll be keeping an eye on questions posed in the chat. So our first speaker is Alexandra Harris, who graduated from Durham University in 2020 with a PhD thesis on Virginia Woolf ecstasy and epistemology, supervised by Professor Patricia Waugh. Dr. Harris has published on Virginia Woolf and taught modern literature, and currently works as a book review editor for the journal Emotions, History, Culture, Society. Our next speaker will be Gabrielle McIntire, who's Professor of English at Queen's University in Canada. Gabrielle's the author of Modernism, Memory and Desire, T.S. Eliot, and Virginia Woolf from Cambridge in 2008. She's the editor of the Cambridge Companion to the Wasteland, which came out from Cambridge in 2015, and her essays have appeared in journals and book collections, including Modernism, Modernity, Modern Fiction Studies, Narrative, Callaloo, the Blackwell Companion to Modernist Poetry, and the Cambridge Companion to the Lighthouse. And her first book of poetry, titled Unbound, is due out any day from McGill Queen's University Press. And our third speaker, Lorraine Sim, is a senior lecturer in modern English literature at Western Sydney University, Australia. She's the author of Virginia Woolf, The Patterns of Ordinary Experience, came out in 2010 from Ashgate, and Ordinary Matters, Modernist Women's Literature and Photography from Bloomsbury in 2016. And a recent publication of hers that relates to this panel is the essay, The Thing in Itself. Sorry, my document keeps sliding away. The Thing is in Itself Enough, Virginia Woolf's Sacred Everyday, which is published in Religion, Secularism, and the Spiritual Paths of Virginia Woolf, a collection edited by Christina Groover, came out in 2019 from Palgrave. And Lorraine's currently working on a new book, provisionally entitled Happy Modernisms, which examines ideas of happiness and flourishing in modernist literature, art, and culture. So we will begin with Angela, who is going to share her screen. We hope. Oh, Gabrielle got kicked off. So.
Oh.
So if you click on the share screen button,
Yeah.
and then do you see your desktop?
No.
And Paola, Angela's definitely a co-host, so she has sharing privileges.
Yes, it says she's a co-host.
So
Let me try again.
no luck. So what happens when you click on share?
I'm just getting, sorry everybody for the delay. Okay, so I'm just getting a screen saying desktop. Maybe it's desktop keynote whiteboard. It's just not coming up for me. Keynote.
Oh, if you click on desktop, that should be your desktop. This is a challenge of Zoom that you can't run through things.
Would it be possible to send it to one of the other co-hosts? If I could do that?
Sure.
Would that be?
Yeah.
Or if you want to put it in the chat.
Oh, great idea.
Access it there.
Okay, fantastic. I'll do that.
Did you already have the PowerPoint open? Because sometimes if you don't, it won't show up when you click to share screen.
I did. Shall I just drag it to the chat? I'll be one moment. but thank you for the ideas.
Oh, Gabrielle, I see you got kicked off while I was introducing you. Sorry.
I'm very sorry. The internet has been perfect for me through the whole conference until that moment.
Okay. Sorry about this. I've got it now.
Okay. So Paolo, are you going to do it, or do you want me to download it?
I can try sharing it on my screen.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm sorry about that. I'll let you know when it needs to.
Yes. I believe this is a keynote and I don't have an Apple computer.
That's it. Thank you so much. Okay, shall I begin, Mark?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Sorry about the delay, everyone. Thank you for waiting. So what is the Woolfian moment of being and how does it relate to ethics? Woolf's moments of being emerge from an impossible but strongly felt desire to see the world without a self. In The Waves, Bernard asks, how describe the world seen without a self? And we see this desire play out in Woolf's narratorial experiments. Woolf's short story, Monday or Tuesday, begins from the gliding perspective of a heron passing high over a church. This is a narrator that offers a perspective that is something closer to pure objectivity. In Time Passes, Woolf makes a more mature attempt at this as the narrator speaks from the airs, traveling through the rooms of an empty house. Woolf does, of course, also emphasize the limitations of the subjective perspective in her writing and offers multiple viewpoints to do so. But it seems significant to me that nevertheless, Woolf continues to long for a single, purely objective perspective on reality. This is put very clearly in Woolf's diary in 1928, when she asserts how difficult not to go making reality this and that, whereas it is one thing. Gabrielle puts this so beautifully in her paper today when she explains that this unified vision is a form of visioning that theologians, saints, and psychologists have long designated as mystical. In my view, the Woolfian moment of being feels mystical, feels ecstatic because it expresses an attempt to touch the radically other and also to go beyond this to reach a purely objective perspective that makes sense of the radically other, like a heron gliding high above the ground with a clear perspective on all. As Lorraine puts so well, Woolf always grounds these moments of transcendent vision in the material and the immanent. The moment of being always begins and ends with the ordinary and the everyday. So what I wish to argue today is, firstly, the Woolfian moment is shaped by an ecstatic leap toward the other that we ought to take seriously as an epistemological process that might just work. Secondly, the Woolfian moment is always about the epistemic first and only secondarily about ethics. One contemporary ethics philosopher who can help us think about the Woolfian moment is Sophie Grace Chappell. She's recently published an ethical study of epiphany, which provides a useful framework through which to understand the Woolfian moment of being. One type of epiphany Chappell describes is the Aha Epiphany. According to Chappell, an aha moment feels ecstatic, and we believe that new knowledge arrives from outside of us. It's given to us. We are passive receivers. What I want to zero in on here is this sensation of ecstasy, of feeling beside oneself. Could I have the next slide, please? And I'm not sure if there's a keystroke that might be sounding while I'm talking, just in case.
Emily, if it's your dog, could you mute, please?
I'm having trouble getting my cursor to go to the meeting. Can you mute me? I'm so sorry. I can't,
Okay.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's turn to an example. One of Woolf's earliest and most well-known moments of being is set out in Sketch of the Past, when she perceives a flower anew. I've got the quote up on the screen. "I was looking at a flower bed by the front door. That is the whole," I said. "I was looking at a plant with a spread of leaves, and it seemed suddenly plain that the flower itself was a part of the earth, that a ring enclosed what was the flower, and that was the real flower, part earth, part flower." What is significant about this passage is the use of the word real in relation to a perspective that is more objective than the one Woolf had previously held. Here, Woolf believes she sees the real flower when she corrects her initial impression that only includes the flower itself. Her latter perception offers a more fulsome definition of the flower. It is now part earth and part flower. This is an aha moment. It's a moment of being, an ecstatic epiphany that takes place when Woolf's understanding of a flower leaps from a purely subjective viewpoint toward a more objective vision. Slide, please. I use the term objective here in the sense given it by the analytic philosopher, Thomas Nagel. Nagel draws on the tradition of analytic philosophy inaugurated by Bloom 3 Set members and friends of Woolf, Bertrand Russell and G.E. Moore. For Nagel, one may make small, objective advances toward an elusive transcendental goal to view the world from nowhere. He defines the subjective perspective as an individual viewpoint on an object. An objective perspective is a new viewpoint on the same object that also takes into account one's preceding more subjective viewpoint. Now, I'm conscious this is difficult to grasp, so I've made this, the next slide is embarrassing but useful. So if we could have that. Here we go. Okay, in other words, one steps beside oneself in order to observe the same object while still holding in view one's former viewpoint. You could say that Nagel actually maps out an epistemological process that is literally and figuratively an ecstasis, a moment of being beside oneself. So Nagel states that sometimes these viewpoints can be reconciled, in which case you have a leap in objective knowledge, and sometimes they simply cannot. And when they can't, when we hold a simultaneously dualistic perspective with little hope of reconciling these, Nagel terms this a form of perplexity, and he gives this great value as they mark out the process of objective thought at its limit. So what he says is you can have an advance in objective thought, but if you only have a form of perplexity, this is useful too. Now, Woolf's real flower is a more objective viewpoint on the flower because it reconciles her second perspective that the flower is part earth with her original purely subjective perspective on the flower. So it is still a flower, even though it is now part of a larger network of earth. And what is really fascinating to me is that Woolf then places the flower on a sliding scale between pure subjectivity and pure objectivity. Woolf's new vision of the flower seems to her to be a token of the real in some larger sense. And she states, "I was conscious, if only at a distance, that I should in time explain it." So here we have, if you can imagine, 3 points along a scale that reach out toward a view of the world without a self. We have a flower, then we have a flower that's perceived as part of the earth, and then we have a more objective vision of the flower that one is yet to see. Now, Nagel talks about this sliding scale too, and by way of example, he points to the shift in physics between Newton and Maxwell. Newton's mechanical concepts of matter in motion were of no use to Maxwell in studying electromagnetic phenomena. So to explain this phenomena, Maxwell required totally new concepts and theories. And you need to recognize that Maxwell's theories are not an extension of Newton's, but rather a huge leap toward a more fulsome understanding of the world. And just as Maxwell's epiphany leapt on from Newton's, Woolf's epistemological process aims to do the same. And about the kinds of questions we never expect to reach a purely objective viewpoint upon. Questions such as, what is the meaning of life? Who was my mother? Who's Mrs. Ramsey? May I have the next slide, please? Now, as Woolfians, I imagine you'll likely protest here and say that this sounds rather like Mr. Ramsey and his ridiculous piano keyboard of genius. And as Woolfians, you might protest that we're actually more interested in the integrity of the epistemological process than in reaching the right answer. On one hand, I say, yes, of course. And an example would be whilst riding the waves, Woolf explains how she tends to be very little persuaded of the truth of anything. What I say, what people say, always to follow blindly, instinctively, with a sense of leaping over a precipice, the call of. You can hear ecstasy in these words. Woolf feels she must leap over a precipice to reach the real. You can sense her body straining toward an experience of otherliness. Woolf cannot name what or who calls to her as she pursues this elusive sense of reality. In this example, there is no sense that Woolf will have the aha moment that she had with the flower or that Lily has at the end of To the Lighthouse. The epistemological process is what matters here, the desire to overreach one's purely subjective perspective and to engage with the call of the other as radically otherly. So yes, but I also wish to answer no. And if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So we're not used to attributing epistemological value to insights about life, but I think this is what Woolf invites us to do. After all, the Lily we encounter at the end of To the Lighthouse has more insight than the relatively naive Lily we meet in the opening pages. In The Lighthouse, the narrator explains what happened to Lily, especially staying with the Ramsays, was that she was made to feel violently two opposite things at the same time. That's what you feel was one. That's what I feel was the other. And then they fought together in her mind. Note the intense oscillation between self and other here, a kind of ecstatic leaping forward and back as Lily attempts to engage with the Ramsays as radically other to her. As a result, Lily experiences a series of aha moments of being, which attempt to reconcile these two violently opposed viewpoints. These aha moments are akin to tokens of the real, as they eventually culminate in Lily's final epiphanic vision, with which the novel ends. And what this offers the reader is a sliding scale of epistemic insights that extend from the relatively subjective, such as Lily's epiphany at the beginning of the novel when she realized she respects Mr. Banks far more than Mr. Ramsay, to the ever more objective, such as her empathetic epiphany toward the end of the novel, that Mr. Ramsay's philosophy must inflict on him intense loneliness. Therefore, when Woolf offers these moments of being, when she seeks to leap over the precipice to answer the call of the other, she does not just offer us a map toward making meaning that demonstrates integrity and a careful balance between subjectivity and objectivity, or as Nagel would describe this, a form of perplexity, but rather Woolf offers an epistemological map that we ought to take seriously because it might just work. Why else would we read Lily's final vision as meaningful? May I have the next slide, please? So my second claim is that Woolf's writing addresses the epistemic and questions of epistemology before ethics. To put this in context, Sophie Grace Chappell perceives epiphanies from the opposite perspective. She states, epiphanies is my name for the peak experiences in our ethical life, that is, in our life. Her starting point largely collapses life and ethics, and Chappell approaches her ethics via what she terms a lived reality, as opposed to philosophical propositions. Chappell states, I take a wide and generous diet of examples to be a useful way of rooting any ethical subject matter in lived reality. This lived reality shares important common ground with Woolf's framings of reality, in that it's essentially phenomenological. So Chappell writes, my experience of the world is informed by the world as presented to me, and the world as presented to me is enmattered by my experience of it. For Chappell, this describes, and I'm quoting, how things are in epistemology, which has important consequences in ethics. Can I have the next slide, please? So whilst Woolf's writing is deeply evocative of phenomenological perspective, I would argue that she doesn't dispatch with reality or epistemology quite so neatly. For example, Lily's ambition in the first section of To the Lighthouse is to know Mrs. Ramsay, and also in true Woolfian style, to question the nature of knowledge. Was it knowledge, Lily asks herself, and she also declares, it was not knowledge, but unity that she desired, not inscriptions on tablets, Nothing that could be written in any language known to men, but intimacy itself, which is knowledge, she had thought, leaning her head on Mrs. Ramsay's knee. The third section of To the Lighthouse opens, tellingly, with Lily's epistemological plea. What does it mean then? What can it all mean? At first, Lily wants 50 pairs of eyes to know Mrs. Ramsay, but then she has an important epiphany about Mrs. Ramsay that is epistemic as well as ethical. Mrs. Ramsay, she cried, feeling the old horror come back. Mrs. Ramsay, it was part of her perfect goodness to Lily, sat there quite simply. This is certainly ecstatic. It's an aha moment, and Lily's epiphany is this. All that really matters, all that she really needs to understand Mrs. Ramsay is her perfect goodness in relation to her. And this ethical insight rests atop the epistemic and epistemological insights Lily has already gathered throughout the novel. And it's after this significant moment of being that Lily finally completes her painting. Now have the last slide, please. So because Woolf's primary drive is for pure objectivity in her writing, it means that she never collapses life and ethics in quite the same way as Chappell. I think to make meaning well is a common pursuit for Woolf and for Chappell. But Chappell begins with the well, and Woolf begins with the make meaning. We could turn Chappell's line about epiphany and life around. When Chappell states, epiphanies is my name for the peak experiences in our ethical life, that is, in our life, we could say that for Woolf, a moment of being is her name for the peak experiences in our real life, that is, in our life. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela, and thank you, Emily, for handling that.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Gabrielle.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share a screen as well. Okay, is that coming through all right?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, Angie, for that wonderful talk. And we have already shared papers in our panel, so I had a bit of an idea what was coming. I'm going to be talking about Woolf's moments of being as secular sacred epiphany. Virginia Woolf's fiction typically assumes a culture and a milieu of modern secularity, with her characters mostly untethered to what she considered to be the restrictive dogmas and illusions of traditional religious beliefs. Woolf herself has primarily been understood as an atheist, with a statement she makes in her posthumously published autobiography, A Sketch of the Past, in 1941, that there is no God, taken as retrospective evidence and confirmation of a thoroughgoing conviction. Jane DeGay, Emily Greisinger, and Stephanie Paulsell have each recently suggested that we reconsider the designation of Woolf as an atheist in light of the complexity and range of Woolf's interest in religious and theological questions. For indeed, we might say that both Woolf's fictional and non-fictional prose are deeply traversed with cautious but persistent explorations of sacred experience. Religio-philosophic terms like revelation, illumination, and vision recur so often in her writing that they begin to seem like key words to grasping the meaning of her oeuvre. She also frequently emphasizes the miraculous in the everyday, a point that Lorraine Sim underscores in her paper today. At the same time, the visionary artist of To the Lighthouse, Lily Briscoe, laments that, quote, the great revelation had never come. But she, like Woolf, finds consolation in and sustaining gratitude for epiphanic glimpses of, quote, little daily miracles, illuminations, matches struck unexpectedly in the dark, end quote. Later in the novel, Lily's claim about the miraculous becomes more expansive. All was miracle. And even ordinary objects, a chair, a table, make her feel it's a miracle, it's an ecstasy. I include in the slide here an image of Vanessa Bell's 1921 painting, now at the Tate, that's entitled Interior with a Table. And certainly part of what Woolf was expressing in her very visual moments of being that I'm hoping we might also come to think of as forms of visually stimulated epiphanies was a way of intense seeing that is akin to some of what the post-impressionists among whom she worked were also seeking. The moment of being that Woolf names as such and parses in A Sketch of the Past also reads like a secular sacred epiphany. And I know this term epiphany is a bit of a contested term to bring into Woolf studies. We remember that epiphany comes from the ancient Greek epiphania, which means a manifestation or appearance, and it's usually with a connotation of suddenness. We recall too that W.H. Auden proposed as early as 1954 in the New Yorker that, quote, what Woolf felt and expressed with the most intense passion was a mystical, religious vision of life, while others, including Woolf's nephew, Quentin Bell, who became one of her most important biographers, have concurred that Woolf, quote, tended to be, as she herself put it, mystical. And a growing handful of critics, since Martin Corner and Suzette Henke in the early 1980s, have insisted on Woolf's mysticism despite her ostensible atheism. In a slightly different vein, Christina K. Groover's 2019 collection, The Spiritual Paths of Virginia Woolf, offers a range of essays that address the spiritual dimensions of Woolf's work and life. In this paper, I'd like to focus on what I'm wanting to call Woolf's visionary mysticism. And I'm going to cite from that crucial passage in A Sketch of the Past, her experiment in life, writing, and writing the self. It is a constant idea of mine that behind the cotton wool is hidden a pattern, that we, I mean all human beings, are connected with this, that the whole world is a work of art, that we are parts of the work of art. Hamlet or a Beethoven quartet is the truth about this vast mass that we call the world. But there is no Shakespeare, there is no Beethoven. Certainly and emphatically, there is no God. We are the words, we are the music, we are the thing itself. To borrow William Wordsworth's phrase from Tintern Abbey, Woolf, in moments such as this, is suddenly and briefly able to, quote, see into the life of things. This piercing insight removes what Woolf elsewhere describes as the screens, and that's Woolf's word, screens, of rational judgment, and thus allows her to, quote, get at the thing itself, so from Sketch of the Past. This desire for proximity with the essential whatness or thingness of being, the universe, and experience preoccupied her through most of her adult life. Meanwhile, what Woolf characterizes here as a revelation carries qualities of both Christian religious epiphany, with its unexpected insights about a messianic redemption that will heal the world, and Joycean epiphany, with its reprisal of religious language to convey the shocking sting of life-altering awakenings that suddenly befall one as if from an outside. So let us briefly consider Woolfian epiphany in juxtaposition with the more well-known Joycean epiphany. Woolf had an ambivalent admiration for James Joyce, There's a short article about this in the New York Times on the centenary of the year of their births, 1882. They were both born that year, so this is from 1982, and it was published on her birthday, the 25th of January. Woolf praises Joyce in her 1921 essay, Modern Fiction, for doing justice to what she calls, quote, the spirit, and then also truth and reality. Joyce, she writes, is spiritual. He is concerned at all costs to reveal the flickerings of that innermost flame which flashes its messages through the brain. Without suggesting that Joycean epiphanies and moments of being are interchangeable, both do mark instances when the mind is suddenly aware of its own ontology and of the distinctiveness of its unique epistemological and phenomenological self-awareness. And both are usually prompted by spectrality and vision. Woolf and Joyce also each propose that such revelations hold a special relationship to language, where the supralinguistic aha moment of insight must almost immediately confront the limits of language and narration. This problematic of having to move through the defiling nature of the signifier prompts a secondary, acute, metacritical awareness about oneself or one's relation to the world in either or both a secular or sacred domain. These secular sacred epiphanies also echo what Woolf describes in her diary as ephemeral moments of great intensity. Here she's describing these moments of great intensity in terms of her marriage to Leonard Woolf. And she suggests that these moments are analogous to Thomas Hardy's moments of vision. That's Hardy's phrase, moments of vision. Of the utmost significance, immersively transcendent moments of being are fleeting, but they provide crucial scaffolding, that's Woolf's word, and enriching mnemonics that uphold and enrich and support the rest of experience. Pericles Lewis writes about moments of being as, quote, almost sacred moments in which experience enters the sublime. And he considers Woolf's embrace of them as a modern form of polytheism. Woolf is able to convey these moments with such intensity in and through language that she further manages to prompt what we might call small leaps of faith in her readers as she reaches across the fourth wall, inviting each of us to be attentive to the significance of such visionary moments, these little awakenings in our own lives. As Gretchen Holbrook-Garcina said today in her keynote talk, when Lily Briscoe puts down her paintbrush, I too have had my vision. And one question I have that might be a place we could return to in our discussion is whether or not we can stimulate these visionary moments. Or are they always, like Proust's involuntary memory, slightly outside of our conscious control? The Wordsworthian life of things that Woolf perceives is one of radical interdependence and permeability between human beings, created works of literature, art, and music, and then, quote, the vast mass that we call the world, end quote, which would include for her global culture, geohistory, phenomena, psychology, and a sense of the world's cosmogony, as well as more localized understandings of the world. Woolf's statement links transhistorical artistic impulses and achievements with a mystical visionary interconnectedness, where human beings are synecdochally part of the world's ongoing oeuvre as creation, even as she refutes God and individual signatory genius. She thus elaborates her mysticism outside of a theistic framework even as she celebrates transcendence, immanence, and altered, intensified states of perception. Woolf's logic affirms the ultimate truth, and that's her word, of a creative, fundamentally artistic universe, of the works of Beethoven and Shakespeare, and very much the work of the human. We are the words, we are the music, we are the thing itself, the labor in a sense of being human and being alive. And in this way, she insists on a coextensivity between each human being and a universal essential whatness. Importantly, she also dispenses with any gesture that would establish mere similitude between us and the thingness of the world. She does not use similes. She notably does not write, "We are like the words, we are like the music," but she declares, human beings are art. We are the tools, we are the media, we are the products of a cosmic creative process. And every anaphoric repetition of her declaration, "We are the words, we are the music, we are the thing itself," depends on a copulative musculature of the we are, putting human beingness on equal and continuous footing with the mystery of ultimate being and thingness. Further, she elaborates, "I see this," and I've emphasized see, "when I have a shock." The flash of insight about our symbiotic relation to a fundamentally holistic order of things means that we are not traces of something else, but that all is singular. In Woolf's frequent borrowing from the language of religion and mysticism, she articulates a permeable oneness with a hidden pattern, order, and logic, perhaps a version of Greek logos, that subtends all life, and as she says, proves that one's life is not confined to one's body and what one says and does. This is a conception, she notes, that, quote, affects me every day, end quote. Part of what this radical singularity of all things means is that our difference from every imaginable alterity, things, art, divinity, others, is collapsed. The eternally deferred différance that structures our being as always already alienated is resolved in such a vision, since nothing about our ontology is ever deferred if we are the thing itself. Keeping in mind Elsa Hogberg's talk from yesterday, I begin to wonder if this is one of the most deeply reparative moments in Woolf. Such visions of the holistic, even transparent, clear nature of things appears in moments of secular sacred epiphanies that are scattered through Woolf's fiction. They occur in the light-filled dinner scene of To the Lighthouse, where looking together united them. And here, Mrs. Ramsay perceives, quote, a coherence in things, a stability, something she meant is immune from change and shines out, end quote. We find them too in the mysterious illumination Lewis describes in The Waves at the last meeting of the 6 characters, when, as Rhoda says, quote, we enjoy this momentary alleviation. It is not often that one has no anxiety when the walls of the mind become transparent, end quote. Instead of the chronic psychic condition of alienation and estrangement from otherness that troubles Woolf's characters in so much of her fiction, we might think, for example, of Septimus Smith, Peter Walsh, and Mrs. Dalloway and Mrs. Dalloway, Lily Briscoe, Mr. Ramsay, Mrs. Ramsay, James and Cam in To the Lighthouse, every character but Percival in The Waves. Woolf's sketch affirms connection, her word, a hidden pattern, and the creative unfolding of a brilliant universe that manifests itself in bodies, beings, words, and music. Estrangement and alienation are alleviated too with flashes of redemptive epiphanic visioning in Mrs. Dalloway, when Clarissa recalls the transformative revelatory moment when Sally Seton had kissed her on the lips. I think my slide somehow got out of order. Yeah. Okay, here we go. She felt that she had been given a present, wrapped up, and told just to keep it, not to look at it, a diamond, something infinitely precious. And from here, Woolf slips almost immediately into religious visionary language to convey the astonishing intensity of this eroticism, the radiance burnt through, the revelation, the religious feeling. Intellectually, Woolf is uncertain and skeptical of faith, belief, and sacred experience, and maintains a rational distancing from organized religion, which she perceives as cognitively dissonant, distasteful, sometimes just outmoded. Emotionally, though, she is drawn to plumb the wondrous and to relay the convictions of mystical insight. Woolf's secular sacred epiphanies, then, just to close, bring her nearer to ultimate meaning and yet force her to involve the intellect too, to confront the very problem of mystery. The enigma of the sacred, which people often describe briefly as something set apart from ordinary experience. So the enigma of the sacred in this way stands as a metonymy of some possible relation to some possible transcendence, which compels Woolf, but about which she is uncertain, agnostic. The almost Kantian sublime incomprehensibility of her moments of being is part of what short circuits them and produces quite often and very abruptly a turn back to subjectivity and self-consciousness, breaking the communion with the thing itself, but prompting longings for more of this ecstatic merging. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Okay, and our last speaker, Lorraine. You are ready?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Can you hear me okay? Good, good. Thanks, Gabrielle and Angela, for those wonderful papers, and to Mark as well for agreeing to chair the session. I'm recovering from the flu at the moment, and I think my voice is still croaky, and I'm hoping I'm not going to cough through this short presentation, so I'll do my best. And I will share a screen. I don't have very many long quotations, but I will put up the ones that I have if I can find them. Oh, sorry, I should have, let me just redo that. I wonder, I might just have to actually open, sorry, 1 second, before I do that.
We could see it.
Can you? I don't think I can move through the slides though.
Oh.
I need to maximize it or something, I think. Sorry. Oh, no, that's not a good idea. Sorry.
If you just click Start Slideshow, it should open. After you share it, and then you just click on Begin Slideshow.
Is that working for you? Can you? Yep. Yeah, sorry, my apologies about that. I thought they might not let me do it from the Blue Mountains in Sydney, but I've been allowed. Okay, so the title of this, this short paper is Moments of Being, Ethics and the Good Life. So Woolf's 1924 short story entitled Happiness begins with a characteristically Woolfian moment of being. The character Stuart Elton experiences an avalanche of sensation precipitated by the most trivial of acts, flicking a white thread off his trousers. From this tiny act, the moment erupts. I quote, "It rushed down all through him, this beautiful, orderly sense of life, this slide, this avalanche of sensation, to be at one." Like the moments of being described in a sketch of the past, this epiphany is aligned with intense feeling and an apprehension of ontological order and unity. The story focuses on the envy that Mrs. Sutton, Stuart's friend, bears towards him, judging him the happiest person she knows. It also explores Elton's reflections on the nature and the source of his happiness. So Mrs. Sutton, it seems, struggles with what Buddhists call mudita and Germans term Freudenfreude, that is, delighting in another's joy or good fortune. To date, scholarship on the ethical significance of Woolf's moments of being has tended to focus on their role in her account of self-other relations, whether the other be an intimate or a stranger. The moment of being can illuminate a friend's goodness, character, or value, as in Lily's epiphanic encounter with William Banks into the lighthouse, in which she reflects on his goodness. More often, the moment of being gives rise to an experience of alterity via the encounter with a stranger, such as the figure of Mrs. Brown described in the essay Mr. Bennett and Mrs. Brown, whose radical alterity comprises a kind of ethical call or demand. So these latter sorts of encounters in Woolf's writing have been assessed in relation to Leibnizian and post-Leibnizian ethics, most recently by Elsa Hochberg in her study Virginia Woolf and the Ethics of Intimacy. And I know that Elsa is the keynote speaker at this conference. In this short position paper, I want to extend the frames of reference for thinking about the relationship between Woolf's moments of being and ethics by suggesting that they are also intimately tied to her ideas about happiness and flourishing. As I will touch on, this is in turn related to another aspect of moments of being and Woolfian ethics, namely the ontological order or pattern which moments of being reveal, as described in a sketch of the past and elsewhere, and which Gabrielle has talked to in her paper so beautifully. So the philosophical connection between ethics and happiness, or the good life, is one that is generally lost in modern and contemporary understandings of happiness, which tend to focus on ideas of good feeling. But the philosophical connection between happiness and ethics has a long history, beginning with the Greeks. For the Greeks, happiness and ethics were intimately related. For example, for Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the highest good is eudaimonia, which is the Greek term for happiness or flourishing. As I've been reflecting in the past year or so on Woolf's ideas about the good and happiness, I've come to the view that they were shaped in some important ways, by her lifelong engagement with Greek philosophy and literature. And while this isn't the paper or the forum to unpack that complex philosophical history and influence, although it's something I'm happy to talk to a little bit more in the discussion later if it moves that way, I do mention it as an important context for this paper, which instead focuses on a few examples that illustrate how moments of being are connected to an idea of happiness or the good life in Woolf's writing in places. So just to return to this short story, Happiness. So in this story, Stuart Elton initially reflects that the big word, happiness, doesn't fit the state of being that he experiences. One he likens to, and I quote, being curled in rosy flakes around a bright light and tinged with an inexplicable glow, descriptions that are very reminiscent of some of the childhood moments of being described in the sketch of the past. But Elton goes on to reflect that his happiness is connected to moments of being. And this is what he reflects. In happiness, there is always this terrific exaltation. It is not high spirits, nor rapture, nor praise, fame, or health. He could not walk 2 miles without feeling done up. It is a mystic state, a trance, an ecstasy which, for all that he was atheistical, skeptical, unbaptized, and all the rest of it, had, he suspected, some affinity with the ecstasy that turned men priests, sent women in the prime of life trudging the streets with starched cyclamen-like frills about their faces. But with this difference, them it imprisoned, him it set free. It freed him from all dependence upon anyone, upon anything. So in this passage, the spiritual dimension of moments of being, which has been a topic of increased scholarly attention in recent years, is very evident. Happiness is not aligned with high spirits, with good feeling, with wealth, with fame, but something closer to an ecstatic relation to the world, to being. While the final sentence in this quotation might sound like an escape into singularity and autonomy, where he says freed from all dependence, the story indicates that Elton's happiness is a product of his capacity to experience this specific kind of attunement to and connection with the world around him. And indeed, two images that he recalls to illustrate this sense of being are, and I quote, a flag in a breeze and a trout in a stream. His happiness that particular day is connected in his thoughts to a visit to Kew Gardens, in which he reflects on seeing the flowers in the lake. Kew was lovely, full of flowers, magnolias, azaleas. He could never remember names, he told her. Oh, sorry. Sorry, my computer's just about to restart, which is incredibly bad timing. Oh. I think my computer is actually just going to restart on me and I might have to log back in. There's nothing I can do to stop it. I'm very sorry, I'll come back. So annoying. I've got 1 minute, 24 seconds, so I'll keep reading and then I'll have to log in again. So Elton is aware that Mrs. Sutton cannot access the kind of bliss and contentment that he enjoys. I might see if I just stop sharing. I'm going to try and get out of here and see if I can stop. I'm going to have to restart and I'll come back to you. I'm really sorry. There's just nothing I can do about this.
Hegemony of technology. So maybe while we're waiting, if people are thinking of questions, you could put them in the chat just so that there are some elements for discussion. Or if you don't want to, that's fine. We'll just reserve all that until the Q&A. This is the first panel I've been in where we've had any kind of technical difficulties, which is really surprising because usually they're endemic. Yeah, given that it was 5 a.m. when Lorraine started, it's probably the time her computer updates because she knows she's asleep. Veronica, can you finish your thought?
Yeah, I'm trying. Thank you. It's the gremlin.
many years ago, my dad gave me a little clay thing with an inscription to hang in my office that said, "To err is human, but to really foul things up, you need a computer."
I'm so sorry about that, technology. Gosh, let me just share my screen again. And I'll pick up where I left off. So how do I might just, can you see these okay? These slides, okay. I think I was up to here. Sorry, so back to Stuart Elton's happiness. Sorry about that. So Elton is aware that Mrs. Sutton cannot access the kind of bliss and contentment that he enjoys. She quizzes him about the source of his happiness, and he somewhat ungenerously imagines her as one of the, and I quote, famished wolves chasing and pursuing his joy. Thus, as Lily Briscoe reflects into The Lighthouse, the moment of being and the kind of happiness it affords takes the form of a gift, the capacity to experience the ordinary world, a table, a chair, as both fact and value, imminent and miraculous. The happiness that Elton experiences relates not only to ecstatic moments, but an inner contentment and a sense of ontological order. He reflects, when he was young, he had not felt it. No, now aged 45, he had only to stoop, to flick a thread off his trousers, and it rushed down all through him, this beautiful, orderly sense of life, this slide, this avalanche of sensation, to be at one. The phrasing here is telling. Grammatically, the sentence drops off, to be at one, with no object attached to the verb, because the experience seems to disrupt or dissolve the subject-object binary. While Elton worries that his happiness might be at risk or precarious, the story closes with a reflection that this version of happiness is not subject to life's contingencies in the same way that a happiness based on fame or wealth or personal favor might be. And this is what he reflects. It was nothing that they could destroy. No, but if it came so inexplicably, so it might go, he had felt, leaving Kew. Some branch might fall, the color might change, green turn blue. That would be enough to shiver, shatter, utterly destroy this amazing thing, this miracle, this treasure, he thought, getting restive and anxious. And without thinking about Mrs. Sutton, he left her instantly and walked across the room and picked up a paper knife. Yes, it was all right. He had it still. So the innumerable atoms of happiness which closed and held him up lead Mrs. Sutton to surmise, and I quote, "Nothing matters to you, nothing changes you." But far from a description of nihilism, Mrs. Sutton observes this thing, this happiness, is what Woolf would describe in a sketch of the past as a background rod. It is like a sustaining wellspring in Stuart Elton's life. And so this last concluding section I've called Treasure Trove. There is much in the short story Happiness and Stuart Elton's reflections on moments of being and their relationship to his own flourishing that is echoed in the sketch of the past. In her memoir, Woolf describes the foundational insight or revelation afforded through moments of being to be a revelation of order to life and being, a pattern, the constitutive features of which are unity, interconnectivity, and co-creation. We are the words, we are the music. And Gabrielle's spoken to this idea beautifully in her paper. Her philosophy of a pattern is an ethics. It's a background rod or conception that affords her faith that the world has an order, a collective meaning or aesthetic logos that subtends the cotton wool of daily life. She lives every day under the influence of this conception and feels that to write and act in accordance with this influence is her responsibility, her purpose. As she reflects in a sketch of the past, this conception affects me every day. I prove this now by spending the morning writing when I might be walking, running a shop, or learning to do something that will be useful if war comes. I think it's plausible to say that Woolf's concept of a pattern, the intuition revealed to her through moments of being, is central to her idea of eudaimonia, that is, living well and in accordance with the good. Moments of being also gifted Woolf with a different kind of daily happiness born from an appreciation for and contentment in the humble and the ordinary. Her susceptibility to moments of being, or epiphanic experience, which in the modernist tradition has its source in the seemingly trivial and daily, amplified, I think, her commitment to presence in the moment, appreciating the small as well as the big and their interrelations, and enabled her to connect with the everyday world through an attitude of curiosity and an enchantment, an appreciation for mystery, which Gabrielle also discussed in her paper today. Of course, this was not a constant mood, but I think an orientation or an attunement to life. And here's one description from her diary on the secret treasure trove of her daily happiness with Leonard, which I thought I'd just use as one example. She reflects the immense success of our life is, I think, that our treasure is hid away, or rather in such common things that nothing can touch it. That is, if one enjoys a bus ride to Richmond, sitting on the green smoking, taking the letters out of the box, airing the marmots, combing grizzle, making an ice, opening a letter, sitting down after dinner side by side and saying, "Are you in your stall, brother? Well, what can trouble this happiness?" And every day is necessarily full of it. So if, as she writes in her diary on the 20th of April, 1925, happiness is to have a little string onto which things will attach themselves, what I'm suggesting is that moments of being and the patterns they revealed formed a kind of foundational or existential string onto which Woolf and the fictional Stuart Elton attached their little daily treasures. Thanks, and I'm so sorry about that computer glitch.
Thanks so much, Lorraine, and all three of you for great papers that have so many interconnections. I know we're supposed to leave a little gap, but I think as we had so many already, we'll just move in. There are some questions in the chat, and I want to take Veronica's first, as she was the first one to begin a question, and the computer gremlin interrupted. But it's so similar to something that I'd been thinking of after reading your papers also. And Veronica wrote, "I'm interested in Angela's idea that Woolf is moving from the subjective view to the yearning for objective reality. In this way, how do you read the mark on the wall then? I tend to think of this text as contesting the objective view of things. As the protagonist is disappointed to hear the mark is a snail, the charm, the ecstasy of the long moment of being is gone." And I know the question's directed to you, Angela, but I'd also be interested to hear from Lorraine and Gabrielle about this kind of tension between outward looking and inward looking that I think comes up in your own ideas about moments of being and epiphany.
Shall I take this question, Mark?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so I actually read the mark on the wall a little differently to you, Veronica, and I like your reading, but at my reading at the end of that story, where there's this kind of abrupt, oh, it's a snail. For me, because there's so much skepticism through that story up until that point, and then the snail's revealed, the war's invoked, and the story ends. The reading I have is that Woolf kind of schools the reader in acts of skepticism, in doubting and trying to see things in new ways, and reach that kind of perspective that exceeds your subjectivity, that makes you creative, and that makes you reach toward the view without a self, this sort of purely objective view. And it's a space that you could call kind of uncanny, because you've got the familiar and the unfamiliar mixing. So when she resolves it abruptly with the snail, and then mentions the war and says, I think the character says something like, damn the war. For me, as a reader, at that point, I feel doubtful that it's a snail, because there's all these clues in the text that it might not be. It's been there for months on the wall, for example, and so on. And I feel that skepticism she's been schooling us in. But at the same time, what I read then when she invokes the war, damns it, and ends, is this hierarchy that I was talking about in my paper, where we need to deal with the epistemic and with the epistemology first, and really think about what is this before we can then take an ethical position on it. So, so my reading's a little different, but I don't see, I guess, and I think this is what you're trying to get at, perhaps, with this purely objective viewpoint as lacking charm, because it's an impossible viewpoint to reach. And so it kind of, I think, is constantly inspiring and constantly pushing her into this space of uncanniness, where what is familiar to you, you try and take, you try and reach your more objective self. You take, and there's lots of ways that this could be described. I've used Nagel today, but you could talk about it as the phenomenological epoche, or as the sort of mystical viewpoint. But it's this viewpoint that's beyond your subjective perspective, that challenges the familiar. So that's how I would answer that.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting interpretation. Thank you.
I don't know if it's relevant, but it's the person who interrupts the narrator, who says, damn this war, I'm going out to buy a newspaper. All the same, I don't see why we should have a snail on our wall. So if that hadn't happened, the moment would have continued, presumably, but sort of endlessly. Gabrielle or Lorraine, did you want to take that on, the question that Veronica posed?
Sure. Well, your question about whether moments of being and or epiphanies, Woolfian epiphanies, are more inward or outward, and then how that relates to the subjective objective spectrum that Angie's proposing. I like that idea, Angie, but I'm not totally sold on it, I guess, because I feel like Woolf is, I mean, maybe this is what you're saying. I feel like Woolf is wanting us to do both, and so the objective and the subjective become merged, because she's seeking such a holism in these moments, these epiphanic glimpses into a different type of seeing. And I think for the inward outward issue, they're prompted by something outside usually. But then again, I wonder, one has to be susceptible to that outside. One has to be in a certain state. If you're completely distracted, if you're very busy, if you're doing a lot of multitasking or something, you're not going to be susceptible to that outside that you suddenly behold in a new way. So it begins with an outside if you're able to be susceptible to the outside, but then what you see, and that is absolutely a key word for Woolf, and the visioning of these mystic moments then prompts inner change and interior ethics. It prompts us to think about how we live, who we are, what is our truth, what is the truth of others. Woolf talks about all of this. And it also prompts us to think, and you know, this is for Woolf, how do we write about these inward, outward, objective, subjective experiences? How do we translate them into this medium of language that she and other modernists are all of the time very metacritically and self-consciously problematizing as a flawed medium, where we're stuttering, we were having difficulty in our media, we're having difficulty in our genres, whether it's poetry or fiction or the essay. She's pushing all these boundaries, you know, a lot of other modernists are as well. So you have, I think you really have both, and in both senses. So that would be my sort of, I don't know, maybe it's not fair to just say, yes, it's both and in both cases, but that's my take on it.
Lorraine, did you want to add to that?
I probably agree with Gabrielle. I sort of think of moments of being, as Woolf describes them, as they do seem to have some kind of, that their origin often seems to come from outside, you know, that she receives this sort of this sort of shock or rupture, but sorry, excuse me, but that those sorts of distinctions, sorry, I'm going to have to come back to you.
Jane asked a question which I think touches also on Lorraine's idea of happiness, that all three of the papers focus on the moment with the flower and as a whole. And that was something that I'd also noticed when I read the paper drafts, that out of the three moments that she cites as moments of, or the shock moments, one is happy and the other two lead to despair and sadness, as the moment, you know, when she and Toby are pummeling each other on the lawn, and then the other one is finding herself out in the garden by the apple tree after overhearing people the parents talking about the suicide, which is a moment also she recreates in The Waves, of course. But Jane asked if you could speak to those other two moments as well as the flower.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. I think because of the way that I framed the moments of being as a moment of ecstasy, where you're engaging with the other as radically other. Ecstasy is, it lies at either end of the emotional spectrum. So it can be feeling beside oneself with that kind of bliss, that kind of like thrill of the aha moment with the flower, or it can be feeling beside oneself with terror. And so when Woolf describes those other two moments, they fit well into this idea of touching otherness, and that being an ecstatic experience, because when she has that moment of violence with her brother, or when she first hears about Mr. Valpy's suicide, or she can't cross the puddle and so on, I think these are moments when she's experiencing the other and is so engaged with its alterity that she's overwhelmed and feeling beside herself, and having trouble sort of staying embodied and feeling and thinking her way through what's happened. And so in those moments, I would say that they're, they're moments of being, they're not yet aha moments, because all that she's experienced so far is the alterity, and she hasn't yet been able to put it away and make sense of it and integrate it into her understanding. So no, I certainly agree with you, Jane, that moments of being cover both types of emotion. But they're always peak emotions right at the end of the spectrum, as very positive or very negative.
Yeah, and maybe if I can add to that, we seem to expect that epiphanies or moments of being will bring positive insight. I think that's a readerly expectation perhaps we bring to these texts, but also to our lives. And in Joyce as well, a lot of the epiphanies that happen, somebody in the chat was asking for some examples, they're quite negative. And so I'm thinking of, for example, Gabriel's epiphany at the end of The Dead, when he realizes that Greta has had this other massive true love in her life. And he's shocked, he's devastated, he's shamed, he's angry. He's beside himself, but not with ecstasy. But he's put out of his regular self by this shock. And then another one, so at the end of Araby, at the fair, when the boy realizes that this fantastical idea he's had of what this fair is going to be like, this bazaar, has been very, well, orientalized for one thing, but just a complete phantasm of his imagination. And what he sees instead is just an ugly realism in the harshest kind of sense, of very base human greed, counting money, that kind of thing. That this is maybe what it's all been about. And anyway, there are other examples I could mention, but in Joyce, I almost feel like he has a theoretical idea of epiphany, which he worked through in Stephen Hero early on, which is his draft for A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. And this was more along the lines of the Catholic Christian interpretation of epiphany as this sudden revelation. And Joyce keeps that apparatus, I think, in his mind as he's working through so much of his career. And yet what he actually gives us in these epiphanic moments are very often insights about depravity or shame or humiliation. And then in Woolf too, I mean, with the puddle, for example, not being able to cross, she also, I think almost not as much as Joyce though, she gives us these moments that are really about trauma. So she says in A Sketch of the Past, I see this when I've had a shock. So she's talking about these shocking, traumatic moments that puncture everyday reality and the flow of regular temporality. And these prompt, sometimes, I think in Woolf more than Joyce actually, these revelatory mystical insights that help her work and move and live on a more ethical trajectory. But also they can be just devastating. So moments of intensity would be one way to describe them.
I'll try and say something without having a coughing fit, I'm sorry. But just to get back to that question of affective range and happiness, because I completely agree, and I've kind of talked about this in the past, the enormous affective range of moments of being. But in terms of happiness, the concept of happiness that I'm wanting to try and work through with Woolf, if it comes through this sort of Greek heritage, it's not actually just aligned with good feeling. It's aligned more with questions of value and the good. And I think the thing that's common for all the moments of being, whether they're traumatic or ecstatic, is that she recognizes them as being of, the highest significance in her life and to her thinking. And this kind of ties back in different ways to, the Greek word for happiness, eudaimonia, in kind of Greek society and culture, that translated as eudai, meaning good, and daimon, God. So the kind of conventional idea was that it had to do with having the good graces of the gods, with luck, with happenstance. I don't think that for Woolf, this has got anything to do with questions of fate, but she does sort of talk about moments of being as being tokens or gifts coming from somewhere else. So she does see this as a kind of a gifts, something is accepted with gratitude, and it takes a significant kind of value. And I think that Woolf kind of takes up this idea of the good in a different kind of philosophical way. So it's not just concerned with questions of fate. And for Aristotle and Plato, it becomes tied more to questions of the contemplative life as well. But I think that it's not just happiness here for Woolf. It's not just about feeling. It's about questions of value, and the moments of being have that kind of that shared sort of importance or significance, irrespective as to whether or not initially effectively they're traumatic or ecstatic. I mean, ecstasy hasn't necessarily got anything to do with happiness in the modern conception either. You know, they're quite different affective categories. So I'm kind of trying to pull out from Woolf a more complex historical sense of this term, and to sort of rehabilitate it because it's become so simplified in the modern world, if that makes sense. But I think it could have real it sort of has quite a complex, rich sort of set of meanings, I think, in Woolf's philosophy. Sorry, I rambled a bit there, but I'm glad I didn't cough.
Can I just come back to you in a sec, Jane? But a couple of Paola and Marlene also brought up Mrs. Ramsey in connection with these moments of being, and I think it's interesting to think of her annoyance with the idea of God that pops into her mind unbidden, because the religious connotations of moments of being are something that course through all of this discussion. And I wondered if any of you wanted to add to what you've said about A Sketch of the Past in terms of Mrs. Ramsey into the Lighthouse. But if not, that's fine.
Well, sure. I mean, a lot of her epiphanies are negative, but she also creates the dinner scene, right? I mean, this is the culmination and the peak of the whole novel. The candles are lit. Many critics have read it as a Last Supper type of scene with religious undertones. Mrs. Ramsey is both Christ and a sacrificial Mary figure. If you want to go on those types of Christological readings, they're there. But one of the moments that really stands out for me as a very positive epiphany of Mrs. Ramsey is at the very end of the dinner scene, when she leaves to put the children to bed, and she looks back at the scene and she sees it. She sees what she's made, and then also recognizes that at this exact moment, this is becoming the past. There, it's over, and she walks away. So she has this kind of agency where she's able to perceive and see it and be present in her vision. She's able to be present and recognize that she is having an epiphany, essentially. And then she's able to walk away from it and step away. So I see that as incredibly powerful and empowering for Mrs. Ramsey to be able to have that self-consciousness about being in the moment of epiphany. Because I think what often happens, and I think one reason why they're so compelling for us as readers, is because we may have them in our lives, but how do we know? Do we really recognize when we're having these moments? And then if we do, how do we write about them? How do you make that translation into language that Woolf is struggling and achieving so much of the time?
Gabrielle, can I ask you a question? I was wondering, when you describe these screens of rationality falling away, what is it that you see as allowing Woolf an access to a mystical experience? Is it that she's combining thought and emotion in a different way, or is it that she's got a kind of feeling forward approach to experience, or what is it exactly that makes it insightful for you?
So one thing I think is this screens term is Woolf's own word, and she doesn't elaborate exactly what she means by it. So we have to parse it, we have to deduce and infer. But I think a lot of what she's after is essentially along the lines of what Aldous Huxley was after when he talks about removing the doors of perception and opening the doors of perception, which is also following William Blake. So Huxley and William Blake are both talking about something that I think Woolf is after as well, which is being able to be more face to face with whatever is. So whether that's, as in Cézanne's case, the bowl of fruit that he paints and renders luminously as this incredible object for contemplation, really for the first time. I mean, people had done it, but Cézanne, he's notorious for having made this moment in post-impressionism, where he asks us to look at just the fruit and not necessarily anything else, not people, not status, not any other reason you might be painting. So I think what Woolf is wanting us to do also is to just come very close to experience and remove the panes of glass, remove the doors, remove the screen. And whether that's rational or emotional, I think it's both. And that's part of what's so fascinating, is because, as with Mrs. Ramsey, Woolf is very often able to experience it emotionally, but also cognitively recognize it and comment on it at the same time. But then I also think it's corporeal and spiritual and mystical. So I think she's got all of these.
Yeah, I think this is what I'm interested about with your paper. When you say mystical and spiritual, what do you mean? Because I think with me, I mean an experience of alterity that's ultimately material and immanent, but using the language that's available to her through the mystical tradition. So I was just interested, when you talk about this removing the screens and this experience of alterity as alterity, what do you mean when you say mystical then?
I'm just really quoting her there. Is it just in A Sketch of the Past, when she talks about getting at the thing itself? So by mystical in that sense, I think she's drawing on some of the mystical traditions of wanting union or unity, oneness, wholeness with otherness, alterity, thingness with the divine. So that's one version of mysticism that I think Woolf is tapping into, is that long tradition of seeking a sublime, essentially sublime oneness with what doesn't seem like it is self.
Yes,
and in the mystical state it is.
And do you read it though, like as an impossible desire that's driving her writing?
Oh, I don't see it. No, I don't read it as an impossible desire that's driving
that's
her.
what I was interested by. Okay.
I see it more as it's something that she's interested in, and it preoccupies her. It recurs as these moments of vision, revelation, illumination, for example, these keywords that keep appearing through her oeuvre. But I don't think she was worried about it. I think she was quite atheist agnostic. She was pretty comfortable with that, and she was interested in a lot of, I think, mystical and spiritual traditions, but not in an anxious way. I
guess I didn't mean in an anxious way. I meant more in a inspired way, because I think that's maybe where our papers differ, particularly that I think that this desire for oneness, for this sort of pure perspective, it does seem to me like that really inspires her when she sort of sees that fin passing out into the waste of waters. Perhaps that's where we have a difference of views. I was just curious where we...
Oh, I totally agree that she finds it inspiring. Yeah, absolutely.
So we only have about a minute left. I wanted Jane to have a chance to ask her question, as she waited so patiently.
Oh, sorry.
It wasn't really a question. It was just coming back to the question of the moment of being, but the importance for being a writer, that, she uses the moments of being to say, this is what makes me a writer. And there is that kind of role in writing about things that sort of brings some of these, the scattered parts and the shattered parts together, that writing is a kind of a reparative act, isn't it? So maybe that sort of unites some of the negative moments of being, the pain inspires her to write, but equally the pleasure of the ecstasy inspires her to write as well. So we've talked a lot about her kind of her mystical experience, but I suppose that she also kind of brings that into her writing. That was just that follow-up comment I was going to make.
Yeah. And is it Donna Lazenby? Is that the right name, Jane? Her book on Woolf and Iris Murdoch and mysticism is really fascinating and very relevant, I think.
Yeah.
Our next break is supposed to begin now. So Lorraine, did you want to say anything if you can? Sorry.
I'm so sorry. Do I want to add anything? No, I in relation to writing, or just
Well, just to give you a
general?
chance for a last comment as you.
Not really. It's just so fascinating. I think the thing that this panel brought up for me again was just the diversity of experiences that come under this banner, moment of being. And I think that that's often something that as critics we struggle with, because we try to find, put forward some kind of theoretical framing, but they seem to vary both in terms of their nature, their effective range, but also their intensity. And I often come back to that comment she makes in A Sketch of the Past, where she says, when she's talking about being and non-being, and she says, every day is full of many moments of being. And she describes very ordinary things. She enjoyed walking across the downs, and she had a nice conversation that she remembers with Leonard. So there seems to be this incredibly, and I know that we all focus on the kind of peak experiences, but I've always sort of been, and we haven't had time to talk about it today, but also how we kind of negotiate this sort of incredible flexibility and range in terms of also intensity. But she considers them all moments and moments of being. And I don't know if anyone in the audience wants to say anything about that before we go, but it's always something I've been so curious about, because she wants to seem to retain this openness around it, rather than kind of, how she says into The Lighthouse, the lighthouse is never just one thing. I always think moments of being, they're just never one thing. So I don't know, Jane, if you perhaps wanted to say something about that.
Put me on the spot now to come back. But yeah, I was also thinking about the 50 pairs of eyes. That also came up in a bit of that conversation through, really, that Lily Briscoe says you need 50 pairs of eyes to see around that woman, and maybe that's something that's lying behind some of this discussion, that kind of different perspectives that all kind of coalesce into a vision.
Well, if we were all in the same time and place, this is the discussion that would move out into the hallway.
Sure.
And so one of the great disadvantages of not being. But then again, maybe Lorraine wouldn't have been able to fly from Australia. So one of the advantages of Zoom. But thank you all very much, the three panelists, and Emily, thanks, and for all your comments. So see you in the next Zoom. It was a great panel. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much, Mark. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mark.
Appreciate it.